welcome wherever you are in the world joining us for the ISPIM virtual conference featuring Tony Ulwick. My name is Andrew Maxwell. I'm a professor at the Lausanne School of Engineering at York University in Toronto. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Tony, who I had the pleasure of introducing actually when we hosted the ISPIM conference here in Toronto a few years ago. So to introduce Tony, people will probably know about my passion for failure. And I always start by telling people the stories that motivated me and motivated other people, which were, we thought we were doing so well, how come we failed? And in 1984, Tony had that experience. We were working for IBM when he was involved in launching the IBM PC Junior. And based out of that became a passion to understand how we could reduce the level of failure. So since then, Tony's been very passionate about developing and building on the jobs to be done framework, job mapping, and a bunch of tools that I use a great deal in the workshops and courses I teach. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Tony, and hand the ball over to you to talk about aligning your organization around a post-pandemic growth strategy. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks for inviting me back. We've all been through a lot in recent months. I think, we've had our challenges. What I want to talk about is what some of those challenges have been, and then how we've been helping our clients address some of them as well. So let me get started. We reached out to a lot of our clients, 3 months ago when a lot of this hit, and we learned a number of things. And these were the common questions that people were asking. They were very concerned that customer needs have changed. Something changed, but they didn't know if they were going to be permanent changes. They didn't know the degree to which they've changed. And the way we think about it is, certain needs took on an elevated importance. And, if they're more important, then that means there could be opportunities there for more value creation. But they also wondered, should we start investing in them now, or should we wait to see if these are permanent changes or not? They wondered, are there new segments of customers that exist with different unmet needs? And how quickly do we have to revisit our innovation strategy? So, of course, a lot of efforts have been put into place to help companies innovate in times of crisis. And I guess the good news is, the concept of innovation and the process behind it hasn't changed. So some of the fundamentals that we deploy in normal times also serve very well during times of crisis. So I just want to review some of the basic frameworks before we get into some more details here. But at a high level, we're saying innovation is the process of devising solutions that address unmet customer needs. So the goal of innovation, of course, is to come up with a product concept that will win in the marketplace. But the key, of course, is to come up with that product concept in the innovation phase, or what I'm calling pre-development versus post-development. In other words, we want to get the right product defined upfront so that everything we're working on development is fruitful, and we're not wasting any time. We don't have to go back and do lots of iterations. So I think this is really the challenge, especially right now. Because time is of the essence. Companies are trying to react quickly, and getting it right the first time is critically important, more so now than ever. Which is why we don't recommend the ideas first approach, and you've heard me talk about this before, Andrew. This approach is inherently flawed. Coming up with ideas without a complete understanding of what the needs are is a path to failure in many, many cases. And what happens, of course, in this case, you're mixing the innovation and the development processes together. They become intertwined. Because you don't know all the needs up front, you generate ideas, you start developing them, you'll learn more about customer needs and go through refinement and iteration. So it becomes a very flawed process. And this is why understanding customer needs up front becomes so critically important. Now more than ever, in order to get this right, we have to know what all those customers' needs are and which are unmet. We have to separate the innovation process from the development process, make sure that the output of the innovation process, which is the product concept, is going to win in the marketplace before we start developing or putting development dollars into place. So why doesn't this happen? This is the question I wanted to pose. And Andrew, I don't know if you set this up so that the teams could vote. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Nick, are we good?
Yeah, looks like it's up. So the question is there agreement on your product team as to what a customer need even is? Right. Is there agreement on your product team as to what a customer need even is? I'll give a few seconds here to get the polling numbers. And if we could get the results. We've been doing this type of poll, asking this very same question for 3 decades. And the answer is always interesting. We see it again here, with roughly 2/3 of the audience saying there isn't agreement as to what a need even is. Now, you could imagine the ramifications of this, right? If you don't know what a need is, how can we agree on what the needs are and which needs are unmet and that sort of thing? So this is what we often say. We said there isn't agreement on what a customer need actually is, what types of inputs are required, and what inputs are needed to make innovation predictable. And of course, this would be a huge problem, right? We talk about customer needs in many different ways. We give them lots of different names, as if any input is a suitable input for the innovation process. We talk about anxieties and delighters and exciters and pains and gains and problems and value drivers and so on. Everyone has a different name for these terms because everyone's thinking about customer needs differently. And this has posed a long-term problem in innovation. And if we don't resolve it now in time of crisis, it's really going to make success even that much more difficult. And this is where jobs theory, of course, comes into play. We know that people buy products and services to get a job done. And we can make the job now unit of analysis. And by doing this, we see everything a bit different. So we're not looking at markets through the drill maker's lens. We're looking at the market through the hole maker's lens. So when we define a market, needs, segments, strategy, it all looks very, very different. This is part of what we call our outcome-driven innovation process, which goes through 5 steps that I'll explain here in a second. And it puts jobs theory into practice. So the first step, of course, is defining the market. How do we define a market? Generally, companies define markets around a product or a technology. But what we're suggesting is that you define a market as a group of people and the job that they're trying to get done. Next, when we talk about customer needs, we're not going to define needs as exciters and delighters or pains and gains or this and that. Very specifically, we're going to define a need as the metrics that people use to measure success when getting the job done. So we're tying needs to the job that the customer is trying to accomplish. We're figuring out how they measure success along each step of the way. Then we can identify opportunities. An opportunity isn't a technology, it's an unmet need. So we want to figure out where the market's underserved, where people are willing to pay more to get the job done better, and where it's overserved, where people would pay less for lower performance. We also want to figure out if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. And this is a question we've seen arise a lot recently. Has the emergence or elevation of the importance of needs created new segments of customers? Well, we need to know this in order to formulate our strategy. And of course, the last step is to use all these insights to build out a strategy and answer questions regarding how to position a product, how to improve products, if there's gaps in the portfolio, if you should make M&A and R&D investment decisions, and along what dimensions. So as we start this process, we think about what customer inputs bring predictability to innovation. And before we even answer that question, we'd have to say, well, what customers do we have? And we have to think about our customers in a little different manner. So as we introduce the Jobs Done Needs framework, we start with 3 customer classifications. And again, one of the huge benefits of jobs thinking is that it offers a framework for customer needs, so we can understand needs in a way that we never could previously. Again, it starts with the customer classifications. The job executor, this is the person who's using the product to get a core functional job done. And we talk about market, we define our market using the job executor as a starting point. It's the job executor plus the job they're trying to get done. So we want to define the market around the job executor. But there's other customers as well. There's often people on the product lifecycle support team, which help support the product throughout the lifecycle. So this could be installing the product, interfacing with it, storing it, moving it, maintaining it, disposing of it. These are all considered consumption chain jobs. Now, people aren't buying the product so they can install it and maintain it. They're buying it to get the core job done. But there are these consumption chain jobs that are associated with every product or service. Then, of course, we have the purchase decision maker. They're trying to get a different job done. They're going through the purchase process, if you will, and they're making a decision based on financial criteria. So you have three different customer types getting three different jobs done, and this forms the foundation of where we want to start our understanding of customer needs. As we go one level further, we're going to introduce the 5 types of jobs. So as you can see here, the job executor is getting multiple jobs done. We're going to define the market around the core functional job, but in addition to getting that core functional job done, customers are often getting what we'll call related jobs done. So there are other functional jobs that they're trying to execute at the same time. Now, the reason we want to know this is because if we can create a product or service that helps customers get multiple jobs done, we have more of a platform level product, which would be worth more in the marketplace. You know, job executors also have emotional jobs. They want to be perceived in a certain light by their peers or feel a certain way as a result of using a product or service and getting the job done. So when we start talking to job executors, we're going to seek insights around the core functional job, the related jobs, and the emotional jobs. Next, we have the jobs, again, related to the product lifecycle, which I mentioned earlier, but you can see all that are included from purchasing, receiving, installing, cleaning, storing, maintaining, upgrading, all these different aspects. And on our website, we have these wheels that you can download, one for products, one for software, one for services, one for consumer products. And then we have the buying job of the purchase decision maker. As we extend this out a bit further, now we look at all the needs that come into play and that we must understand in order to make innovation predictable. And we love following this approach because as we capture outcomes on the core job, for example, these related jobs, emotional jobs, outcomes on the consumption chain jobs, and the financial metrics that the buyer's using, we now have a complete set of customer needs. Now, another way I like looking at this is, if you were to talk to customers about their needs, they would fit in one of these categories. But what most companies don't have is a categorization scheme that allows them to capture and organize and group the needs in the appropriate location. So you end up with lots of inputs, but you don't know where they belong or why or how to use them. By separating them out like this, you have a framework for not only identifying them, but for figuring out how to use them as well, and where they fit in the grand scheme of things. Let's talk about these need statements. Back on the last page, I talked about outcomes as metrics that people use to measure success when getting the job done. And quite literally, they are metrics. And the way we came up with this is to sit back a number of years ago and say, you know, we're trying to come up with an input that makes innovation predictable. What specifications must we place on a need statement? What characteristics must they have? We think about this as inventing the perfect need statement, right? If you could just whiteboard it and say, we want to invent the perfect input into the innovation process, what would it look like? Well, a need statement has to meet certain criteria. In other words, they have to be knowable and discoverable. We can't have inputs that people can't articulate or don't know they have, right? So this breaks down this argument that customers have latent needs and they can't articulate their needs. Well, if that's true, maybe we're just defining needs incorrectly. You know, if you're going to give up like that, you're just going to be operating in ideas first space, because you're going to assume if customers don't know their needs or can't articulate them, why are we bothering talking to them in the first place? So we need to define a need in a way that is knowable and discoverable. These needs have to define success from the customer's perspective on how to get the job done faster, more predictably, with higher output and throughput. And these need statements cannot be solutions. They're not ideas or features. They are something different than that. And you've heard the saying, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Well, maybe that's right? But a faster horse is a solution. It's not a need. And the only thing that statement proves is that people don't know what solutions they want, but they certainly know what jobs they're trying to get done and how they measure success along each step of the way. So talking to customers about their job to be done is a way to achieve these insights that were previously unattainable. We're also going to prioritize these statements and ask customers to tell us which ones are important and unsatisfied. That means they have to be unambiguous, can't have inconsistency in the structure, the format, introduce words unnecessarily. They have to be organized in a way that they can be prioritized. They have to be valid across the customer population. And most important, the way we define this statement cannot introduce variability into the innovation process. We've taken a lot of time and effort to study the impact that changing up these statements will have on the way they're prioritized for importance and satisfaction. And of course, from a product team standpoint, they have to be stable over time. This was my big lesson that Andrew mentioned back in my IBM days. It's not as if we didn't go talk to customers. We talked to them. They told us what they wanted. We built what they wanted. We introduced it a year and a half later, and it wasn't what they wanted. The target changed, right? And so one of the key criteria of a good customer needs statement is that it has to be stable over time. That's why tying it to the job to be done, which is a stable unit analysis, allows us to define needs that are also stable over time. These inputs also have to be actionable across marketing and development, R&D. It's not as if every part of the organization has their own understanding of customer needs. There has to be a shared and common understanding of what the customer's needs are and which are met. Then, of course, we can start making some great progress. So again, we're going to define customer needs as the 100 or so metrics that customers use to measure success when getting the job done. And we call these metrics the customer's desired outcomes. And this is where outcome-driven innovation comes from. It's all based on understanding what are these metrics tied to the customer's job so that we can measure and control progress, customer progress, as we start creating new products, investing in technology, M&A investments, and so on. They're all contributing to helping customers get the job done better. I also like this because it lays out the vision for the future, which is to get the entire job done on a single platform. Most products only get part of a job done. And if you go and create your own job map, you'll quickly be able to figure out where opportunities might exist to get the job done better. As we define these statements, we put them in just two structured formats. One is this, minimize the time it takes to do something in a certain context. And the other looks like this, minimize the likelihood of something bad happening in some context. And I love thinking about it in that simple fashion, because in order to get a job done better, you can get it done faster, more predictably, higher output throughput. That's the way to improve any process. So if we can define customer metrics that are stated in this fashion, we can get all the inputs that we need in order to help customers get their job done better, meaning faster, more predictably, higher output throughput. And with these insights, we can begin to make innovation more predictable. A quick example, let's say the job to be done is to maintain the health of your teeth. Well, outcomes could be minimize the time it takes to remove particles from between teeth, or minimize the likelihood that enamel wears down over time. A related job might be keep my teeth white. An emotional job might be perceived as affluent. A consumption chain outcome might be minimize the likelihood that harmful germs are harbored in the device, or minimize the likelihood of damaging my gums by using that device. And a financial metric might be minimize the cost of product waste. So again, you can see where all the different pieces fit in the grand scheme of things, and knowing how to collect them, where the pieces fit, and where to apply them in the innovation process is critical to success. Also, in terms of what to expect, it's not as if there's just 5 or 10 customer needs, and I think this is why this is so important as a framework. There might be 50 to 150 different outcomes on the core job. There might be 20 or 30 related jobs that customers are trying to get done. There could be 10 or 20 emotional jobs associated with that core functional job. There might be 20 to 80 consumption chain outcomes associated with product installation or maintenance or repair. And there might be 15 to 50 financial metrics that the buyer's using to make the purchase decision. So all these ingredients are necessary in order to make innovation predictable. But the good news is, since you're focused on a stable unit analysis, once you have this set of inputs, they don't change over time. What will change is the importance and satisfaction of the outcomes, but the outcomes themselves are a roadmap to success in the future, both in the short term and the long term. So by applying these methods, of course, we can make innovation more predictable. That's been the goal from day one. How do we come up with a product concept that will win in the marketplace? It means we have to know what the customer's needs are before we finalize the product concept. We can't be putting a product into development, hoping it addresses needs and learning about it as we go and iterating and failing fast and so on and experimenting. Let's do the right things and then do things right. And by applying this approach, we're able to do exactly that. The way we formulate the growth strategy is generally to discuss what are we trying to achieve. Then there's a customer immersion section where we discover all the customer's needs. We generally do this with 5 to 10 customers. We'll get them in the room for anywhere from a half day to a day and a half, and basically teach them how to give us good inputs, and we work together to create a job map and set of outcomes. Then they get quantified in the field. We can figure out which ones are underserved. We can find if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, and then we can formulate the strategy. This is the way we've always executed the ODI process. One of the things I've heard more recently, though, is how can we do this more quickly? You know, we have to react quickly. So there's different formats that change the fidelity of what your inputs and outputs are, but they can all be very effective. Just in recent times, we've helped companies through their strategy exercise in just 3-day workshops where we involve customers as well, where we create a job map, get a set of needs, prioritizing the customers, and work very quickly to identify what the new strategy might be. Lower fidelity, but very speedy. Then we offer a sprint format as well, where again we talk with customers to understand their needs, but what we add in here is a more robust quantitative portion so we can figure out where the opportunities exist with statistically valid data. Then of course there's more complex scopes too, and we've worked in some markets where everything has changed. The needs of the buyer, the needs of the job executor, and the needs of the product lifecycle support team. But understanding how those needs have changed is absolutely critical. So there you have it, Andrew. I just want to make a note here that you can get a copy of my latest book. We've made it available for free as an audiobook and an ebook. Of course, you can still order a hard copy on Amazon if you want to pay a few dollars for it, but this would be a great next step to learn how to put all the rest of the process into practice and hopefully come out of this situation better than you went in. Andrew, I think we have a few moments for some questions as well.
Yeah, Tony, thank you so much. Very interesting. I love this framework, to be honest. I don't think I really understood it when you first explained it to me, but applying it and applying it and applying it helped me refine it. And I really encourage people to just start doing it, start using job mapping, start looking at the needs. And as you do it, it becomes kind of intuitive. But so thank you. I have a couple of detailed questions. The first one is, sometimes, particularly if your customers are businesses, there are second order people that you have to satisfy. For example, government regulations or health and safety inspectors. How do they fit into that needs map?
Yeah, we consider them constraints, right? They're things you have to do. They're just constraints on the system, if you will. So we include them as constraints when you do your ideation work and that kind of thing. They're just a given. They're not. That's not something you can prioritize. They're must-have if you want to look at it like that.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, one of the things that would logically follow as you go through this process is you identify lots of needs, and how do you choose between them? Because we already know there's a lot of evidence from Herbert Simon onwards that people don't know their needs, or when they're actually making decisions, they choose a limited number of things to make their decisions on. How do you find out which are the most important? How do you rank the needs?
Yeah. So this is where we do our quantitative research, and we put a survey out into the field that contains all the needs. So it might be 150 different statements. So it's a fairly elaborate survey. We organize them by job steps, so people just see maybe 8 to 10 outcome statements at a time related to a step. And we ask them to rate them for importance and satisfaction. And we ask them to tell us what solutions they're currently using. So that way we can run some competitive analysis against certain technologies or brands or very specific products. But what comes out of that is all the needs that are very important and unsatisfied, and also the needs that are unimportant and very satisfied. So now we have two ends of the equation. We can figure out where do we need to focus to get the job done better, and then where can we focus to cost reduce the product. And if you think about innovation as coming up with a solution that gets the job done better and more cheaply, now we have the inputs to address both of those. So when we prioritize the opportunities, as you will, we're prioritizing them in that fashion.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. So I have another question here. How is the jobs to be done method different from user activity cycles that are very common when people are talking about product service design?
Yeah. Well, I think, one, we often talk about this as ODI and jobs as we apply it. It's not a design process. It's a product planning process. So it's different in the sense that we're really applying it more at a system level to define the product portfolio. And so we can have different products going at different segments of customers. So we really, the intent was never to apply it down in development at the design phase, although a lot of people do. And they'll just take like one part of the consumption chain job, for example, like installation, and they'll study the job of installation and understand the metrics that people are using to measure success as they install a product. And then the designers can use those insights in order to create the product in such a way that it's easy to install. And I think that's where you start seeing this overlap between where we go and many other design tools that have already been in place and have been in place for years.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. And I think people are trying to fit in how they can do this alongside other tools, and many of times that they complement or help each other. So one final question, because I know we're running out of time. And this is like the classic question, and Christoph Deutscher asked it. It's like, what's the best way to bring this approach into an organization that's involved in product development, that's not familiar with it? How do you kind of sell the concept, sell the idea?
There's nothing better than success, right? To demonstrate the success. So the way we love doing this is a very fast, cost-efficient way, which is generally through a workshop activity, where we introduce people to the concept of jobs theory and outcome-driven innovation, and then put it in practice. So we'll work with that team for a day or two to define a market that they want to improve. We'll define the market through the lens, create a job map, bring in customers, talk with them and show them how you get outcomes from customers. That's very remarkable because, most people, like I said, don't even agree on what a need is. So in a day and a half or so, you can go from people don't agree on what a need is to they agree on what the needs are. And they've seen them come from customers and they see the list of the 100 statements, and now they've transformed their thinking. And now they want to go further, right? So as soon as you can start providing that kind of information that they can immediately act upon, like the job map and the set of outcomes, they generally want to figure out, well, let's go prioritize and see which ones are unmet and build our strategy around it. But it's getting them through that first shift. It's because it's truly a mind shift, right? We're asking people to think about innovation differently and stop thinking about products. Let's start thinking about the job the customer's trying to get done and analyze the job. And once we have all the pieces in place, then we start thinking about products. It's just a different discipline, but I've heard many people say it to me. They said, once the bulb went off my head, once it clicked and I could see it through this lens, I can't unsee it, right? And so I think just taking them through that exercise gets the light bulb to go off, and then it all starts making sense to them. becomes more intuitive, Andrew, like you said earlier.
So thank you very much. It's a really great insight. And I think the idea that in a short workshop, people can transform their thinking and maybe their light goes on during that workshop is actually probably the best way. So try to introduce, a half day, one day with people. And by the end, they'll be talking differently. They'll be actually talking about real needs versus what we could do or what the market is. And that becomes the lever to move to the next step. So, Tony, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank everyone for participating today, wherever you are in the world. Stay safe. Tony's website is strategy.com. There's a bunch of resources on there as well as his free book. And thank you for your time today. And thank you very much for joining us, Tony, and for Nick and Ian for your backup and technical support.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure.